in May of this year, there was a horse race called the Kentucky Derby. You've probably heard of it. It's one of the most famous horse races in America, and it's probably the only one that you've watched on television. I know it is for me. I'm not a horse racing guy. I don't really keep up with the sport, but I find that every May, somehow I find myself watching this race in the background, never with much attention. But I remember this year I was at my parents' house and I was watching as the race was about to begin, and they trot all the horses out onto the racetrack. And there's 20 horses that run in the Kentucky Derby. And I remember seeing a horse run out or trot out with the number 21 on its back. And I thought, that's weird. There's only 20 spots. How is there a 21st horse? And as I kept watching, I found out that the previous day, there was what was called a healthy scratch. And what that means is one of the horses who was intended to run was not going to be running anymore. So the team at the Kentucky Derby got on the phone and called the next in line, which happened to be this horse called Rich Strike from Oklahoma. So the team with Rich Strike was intending to go to a totally different city for a different race, and they thought, we're being invited to the Derby. We got to go. We got to course correct and we got to be there. And so they moved heaven and earth in order to get to the Derby. And so they got there, and a little context about this horse. Rich Strike was purchased only 8 months prior to the Kentucky Derby. He was bought for $30,000, which might sound like a lot of money, but if you compare it to the richest horse in the world, the richest horse in the world, the most expensive horse in the world cost $70 million. The most expensive horse that was running in the Kentucky Derby that day cost $250,000. So he was outpriced by 10 times the most expensive horse that was running next to him. He had lost every race that he had run in up until that point. The best that Rich Strike had performed was 3rd place. He really wasn't an impressive horse, to be completely honest with you. It was the odds on his betting line were 80-1. It was one of the biggest odd spreads in Kentucky Derby history. To put that in perspective, percentage-wise, it's a 98.7% chance that Rich Strike was not going to win. And so as they trotted out onto the field, there were all these mini documentaries about all the other horses and all of these backstories that were being spun up to get you excited about each horse, and especially the front runners. And Rich Strike had nothing. There wasn't even a single photograph to get you excited about this horse. And they run them all onto they get them all into their individual lanes. Rich Strike is all the way on the far left, last position. And I remember the race begins, and they open up the gates. And the commentator said that it was the most breakneck speed of any Kentucky Derby in history. It was the fastest that these horses had ever gotten off the line. It was nearly dangerous how quickly these horses were running. And Rich Strike, understandably so, was in the very back and had to make the longest journey to the rail, which is the shortest route to victory. And so because he was in the back, all of the horses in front of him were kicking up dirt as they were running. And so Rich Strike is covered head to toe, goggles, face, nostrils, everything in dirt from being in last place. And the owners knew, the horse trainer Eric Reed said that the thing that excited him most about Rich Strike was his durability and longevity. That if he could just run long enough, that he had the tenacity and the power and the strength to do something special. The Kentucky Derby is 1.25 miles, which is a long race for a horse. And so as they were going, you can't even find Rich Strike in the whole pack. He's lost. And as they're running, they get to the mile marker, and it's all of the expected front runners who are leading the charge. And all of a sudden, you see this horse kind of weaving his way through the pack. And here comes Rich Strike with his nose down. And you see him as he's making progress. And what I loved was I was looking at his form, and he wasn't looking straight ahead. Rich Strike was staring at the horse in first place. He was locked on to the only horse that was standing between him and victory. He wasn't focused on the finish line. He was focused at being in first place. And so he charged, and moment by moment started making strides and was outpacing these horses that were way more valuable than him, way more touted than him, way more well-respected than him, and just kept on moving forward until he finally crossed the finish line. And I remember watching as Rich Strike was being trotted to the winning circle. They drape the roses over his back. The Kentucky Derby is also called the Run of the Roses. And it's because they drape these horses in roses. And you can only imagine how fresh and aromatic these flowers smell as they drape hundreds of roses, beautiful, perfect roses. And it just caught me that these pristine roses were being laid on the back of a horse covered in dirt, who was defined by last place, who was defined by being behind the entire time, and yet was being given the perfection and the pristine honor of these roses. I remember watching as Eric Reed, the horse trainer, came down in tears. And he told the story of how 6 years prior, his barn that housed all of his horses had caught fire. And he lost 23 horses. And he said he never thought he would rebound from that. He never thought he would be able to come back from a tragedy of that magnitude. And he said people banded together and donated horses to him and got in his corner and said, "You're not done yet." And he found himself with one of the greatest accomplishments in horse racing history, with his horse that nobody believed in and nobody thought had any chance. And I wonder how often we feel like the 21st horse in the race. Like if anybody pays enough attention, they'll notice that we don't even belong there. And to know that inside of us, there is a long distance endurance that we're capable of overcoming the greatest odds, of overcoming everybody else's expectations of our failure. That if we just continue on, that if they give us a long enough track, we will find a way to get those roses draped over us as a symbol of our tenacity, as a symbol of our ability to overcome obstacle and look our own inadequacies in the face and say, "You just haven't given me enough track yet." I wonder if Rich Strike can remind us that this is a long race and we're not here as sprinters. We're here to be more like Rich Strike.